All right, folks, welcome into Carps Corner. And got a lot of topics here, a lot of football, a lot of NFL, a lot of college, a lot of news, some topical as far as on-field stuff. We've got contract situations. We've got coaches' beefs, coaches ignoring gag orders, coaches suing their league, possibly getting a little bit of success on that front as well. So we'll get that done and talk about that. But there's so much going on, and I apologize right now. We're right in the midst of it. I have 4 children, 6th, 5th, 2nd, and kindergarten, 4 different schools right now. Thanks to everything that happened with COVID and moving kids around. And so we've got all these different graduations, everything else. And listen, I'm all about celebrating accomplishments and achievements. And I know that we do it for everything. And I was just at my daughter's 5th grade promotion. We're promoting from elementary school to middle school. And I told her congratulations afterwards. And with that, she looked at me and said, "For what?" And I'd be like, you know what? That made me feel good. I was a little proud of her for that, because I don't know if we should truly celebrate. I know it was 6 years, but I don't know if we should really just be celebrating moving on from, elementary school to middle school. That should kind of be the expectation. So if you want to have a little clap out, something like that, great. I don't necessarily need the full on ceremony and vitamin C being played. I love vitamin C in the graduation song, but I want to reserve that for high school, college, anything else, graduate trade school, whatever it is, something where you're going to be going off into the world as opposed to just going on into another level of mandatory education. I leave it with that. And I also had we'll call it my date anniversary with my wife. Sounds kind of corny, but I met her in college and convinced her to go on a date with me. And with that spun ultimately us being married then for 15 years coming up this March. So pretty was juiced up about that, but that was May 26th. So, still got the shirt that we wore on our first date. It still fits surprisingly, maybe a little looser now, not quite as big as I was when I was 20 years old, but we've got all that. So a lot of stuff going on for me. So I apologize. Try to get 2 out a week this week, possible, or 3 out a week this week, probably only 2. And there was some hits on McAfee and everything else I've got going. It's just been fast and furious, but exciting nonetheless. So going to start out this with the NFL owners. And it was reported, it was leaked out there that there's a lot of movement behind potentially a forced sale of the Commanders, the Washington franchise, by Dan Snyder, and that there was starting to become enough support for other owners for that to potentially happen. Now, number one with the NFL, as you look at this, to get a forced sale, a lot of things have to happen. And before I even get into that, let's start with this. Dan Snyder, been a part of some things that have been investigated, has not run his organization very well. There's things that are possibly illegal, sexual harassment, all kinds of things, possibly, theft from his other owners as far as their revenue sharing, lots of stuff. I'm not here to weigh in on that. What I am here to talk about is the precedent that the NFL and the owners don't want to set for forcing a sale of an NFL franchise. No NFL owner wants to see another owner have to be forced to sell, put forth to see if they can get 24 votes required, the 75% threshold, to be able to force a sale. Because they don't want that precedent to happen. Because they all know, whether it's Robert Kraft, Jerry Jones, Stan Kroenke, you start picking these guys' names out. I mean, big time owners worth tons of money. None of them want to be put in a position to where they feel like their back is against the wall and they're forced to sell private property out of the most exclusive club in the United States. That's the NFL ownership group. There's 32 teams. There's 31 of them that are owned privately. Excluding the Green Bay Packers, it's the toughest club to get into. Donald Trump tried to buy in a long time ago. They said no back in the 80s. This is something that they have to approve you with ownership, and you have to have tons of cash now at this point. And that is what has driven these valuations for the franchises through the roof. And so the owners don't want to set this precedent. They don't want to force Daniel Snyder to sell the team because they know at some point in the future, something could come out about them and one of them could possibly have their head on the chopping block. And all of these men are very, very successful. They don't like to be told what to do. They don't like to be pushed around. And so none of them, I think, despite the fact that they may hold their nose sometimes at Daniel Snyder, and they might not necessarily like what he stands for and like what he does and like the way he runs his team, none of them want to set the precedent to take a franchise away from another owner and force a sale. Even though Dan Snyder would probably stand to make, I'm guessing, a couple $1 billion. I'm not sure what he bought the Redskins for, or the Commanders, excuse me, Redskins back then. But I'm guessing it was probably around $1 billion, maybe 2, 1.5. They'd sell for probably 4 to 5. They're talking about the Broncos going for $5 billion. I'm guaranteeing you the team in our nation's capital would go for that as well. So he'd make out like a bandit as far as cash, but he don't want to sell. And I don't think the other owners are going to make him. They're leaking this out. They want to try to put a lid on this. And they want to try to make certain that there is no more information, because it's one thing to have a bunch of stuff come out at once. It's another thing for a slow bleed. And that's what it's been for Dan Snyder and the Washington franchise for about the last 3 to 5 years. It's always been something. Every 6 months to a year, another story, another allegation, all over the place of all kinds of different things happening. And the owners hate it. They don't like it. The NFL doesn't enjoy negative publicity. And that's the main problem. So I think by them leaking this out is saying, hey, let's get a lid on this thing, put it together. In a year from now, Congress, I mean, people will still kind of be talking about it, but hopefully they'll be in a situation where this isn't just a bleeding that won't stop. Basically like you're getting leached, because the NFL doesn't want just bad publicity, especially with the same franchise over a prolonged period of time. And that's what's been happening in Washington. But I don't believe, I would be shocked, I would be stunned if the NFL owners even take it to a vote, because I don't think they'll take it to a vote unless they know they have the votes. And to get 24 votes, you're not getting Dan Snyder's. That's number one. I doubt you're getting Jerry Jones. That's number 2. You only need 7 more owners to side with you to ultimately say, hey, we're not going to take it. Robert Kraft, if you look at some of the things that have happened with him, I doubt you're getting him on board. There's a number of guys who all of a sudden look around. Jimmy Haslam, probably not going to get his vote based upon some of the things that have happened with him. And so you start counting up all these different owners that have had different incidents. That is incentive for them to say, hey, I'm not voting to take a guy's team away, because that could have been me at one point in time. Now, with that, I think part of the reason that John Gruden got hemmed up was the fact that all that stuff was going on with Washington. 650,000 emails were reviewed. They leaked out a handful of them, all mostly concerning John Gruden. Why? I don't know. Maybe they wanted John Gruden fired. Maybe they thought that he'd been pushing back long enough, that he was too tough against Roger Goodell. He said some things that Roger Goodell didn't like, and this was his chance to off him. I'm not here to tell you what John Gruden said what was right. I know a lot of people have coached for him, played for him. I think John Gruden is a fine guy. But they wanted to, I believe, get him out of there. And also, this was an opportunity to distract from some of the stuff that was going on in Washington. We're going to turn it off of an owner and throw it to a coach, because his emails were the only ones that were leaked out. And so he's ultimately suing the NFL for defamation, going after him. And the NFL was trying to get the case thrown out, first of all, and if not, moved into arbitration, which is how the NFL does everything, binding arbitration. And that's different than a public court. You don't have a public judge. There's no jury involved. You know, you're dealing with simply an arbiter that's selected. You know, the NFL has this pool set up where they go get their person to come in and essentially preside over the case. And it's really tough to win, and it's much more closed down. You don't have near the leaks that you do in any type of public trial. And because with this, if John Gruden's able to get this thing to trial, he'll have discovery. And what discovery is going to do is give him access to those 650,000 emails to find out what else was in there. And I guarantee you this, there was more than just what happened to John Gruden. There's emails from all over the place in the NFL, along with Dan Snyder and everything else. Because remember, this was part of the Washington investigation. All of those things, like there's a lot of meat on that bone that the NFL doesn't want to get into. Now, with that, look at John Gruden's side. Look at his perspective. He's never going to be able to coach again. Dude's 60 years old. His reputation's been ruined. He can't go back and work in the media anymore. He's got a lot of cash in his pocket. Made a ton of money on Monday Night Football. Has coached for a long time. Doesn't strike me as a massive spender. And so with this, I think his only incentive is to burn down the NFL. I don't think he'll settle. It would have to be an exorbitant, a ridiculous, an inordinate amount of money that you would give in this situation for John Gruden to settle. Because I think what he cares about most is clearing his name. He said he's guys in his 60s. This doesn't matter to him as far as cash. Yeah, sure. I just think he wanted to coach football. It's a lot of money, but I think he wanted to coach. And they took that away from him. And they picked him out and they targeted him. Make no mistake about it. There's 650,000 emails. They picked the ones that contained some of his stuff. Those were the ones that got leaked in a private investigation. And the NFL said they didn't do it. Well, there's only a handful of people that had access to it. So who do you think did? And so John Gruden, make no mistake, he's coming for him. And Adam Schefter, tweeting out that they didn't get it thrown out and it's going to be able to go to trial. And I'm here for it all day long. Other NFL news, Pro Bowl. NFL is looking at potentially eliminating the Pro Bowl. And looking like that's probably going to happen. And so what do you have in its place? And here's the irony. People say they hate the Pro Bowl, and the ratings dipped the last couple of years. But prior to that, everyone said they hated it. No one watched it. There's times where the Pro Bowl would rate better than a World Series game. So we can talk about how we hated it all we liked, but people still signed up to watch. They still tuned in. And they voted with their time, and that generated ad revenue. And as long as the NFL was getting ad revenue and the TV partners were happy, they were good. So what do you do in its place if the Pro Bowl is done? I think you can still vote for it the same way. I think you can still pull players in the same way. The things that I loved, and I look back when I was younger, and I'd sit up and watch them now. I love the quarterback skills competition. Put some sort of offensive skills competition is for the running backs and receivers. You can do some sort of agility stuff, obstacle courses, fitness strength tests for the offense and defensive linemen, short little races, nothing where anybody's going to just blow a hammy and explode or something like that. It's stuff that where you can limit injury. You can see how physically gifted and athletic these guys are, make it a controlled situation. And with that, I think that'll generate fan interest, get the fans out there to interact. And I think people would love this. It's not going to have, everything wrapped around the Pro Bowl where it's starting to look like, glorified touch football, if you even call it that. I mean, nobody wants to tackle. I don't blame them. Football is a violent game. It doesn't set itself up well for all-star games. And it makes a lot of sense because if it's physical and it's tough, you get hit in the knee, that's not going to feel well. You could blow out your ACL. You could roll an ankle. You can break your neck. There's a lot of bad things. And so it's not something you can go out there and play for fun and feel like you're not going to get hurt. So you got to be careful with it. And so I think this is the next iteration, the next evolution of what we'll ultimately see with the Pro Bowl. Do some sort of skills competition, just like they used to do back in the day. I would watch it. I think a lot of people will watch it. And I think it's something that a way for it to continue to exist without just eliminating the concept entirely. So see ultimately where that goes. Wanted to transition, got two other things here to get into. Number one, Charles Barkley. We'll throw this clip up here. Charles Barkley's not a fan of Aaron Rodgers' man bun. Doesn't like it. Said a man bun, that's not a thing. That's called you're too cheap to get a haircut. You can't make something. Get a haircut, Aaron. Like, I laugh at Charles. I love him. He can say whatever he wants now. If everyone wants to have long hair, have long hair. I mean, we've since moved past all this about hair, long hair, short hair, backwards hat, frontwards hat. I mean, dude, it's 2022. But I love that Barkley speaks his mind. I love that Aaron is going to do what he wants to do, grow his beard out, put his toe up on Pat McAfee's show. I mean, Aaron lives by his own rules now, and he's good enough that he's able to do it. Dude is incredibly talented, insanely talented, even into his late 30s. So if he wants to have long hair and look sweet, then sir, have long hair and look sweet. All right, so back to something a little more serious. Two other college football stories. A lot of things have been happening in college football as we know about, the Jimbo Fisher, Nick Saban, divisionless stuff in the NFL in college football now with the championships. And so that we know the Pac-12 has gone divisionless. We know that the ACC is exploring it. We know the Mountain West has eliminated divisions for their championship game. SEC will most likely do it once Texas and Oklahoma come in. The Big Ten has pulled down their future schedules after this season. And so this season is going to be going forward. But after that, they always have the Big Ten schedules sitting out there, and you can plan around it and plan accordingly. And each team obviously has their non-conference and stuff, but those have apparently been pulled all down. And I would suspect, I think the Michigan State AD has alluded to this, the big changes are coming. The Big Ten will do away with divisions. Now, what will be their solution, you ask? Or do they go in with like two locked-in rivals, which is what they used to do prior to the admission of Nebraska when they had 11 teams, and you have two locked-in rivals? For argument's sake, Ohio State had Penn State and Michigan. Penn State had Michigan and Michigan State. Michigan had Penn State and Michigan State. And those were like the big four on the East that all kind of just always rotated and played each other. You had Purdue and Indiana were always locked in. Illinois and Northwestern were locked in. Like, you had these regional, Indiana, Purdue, like you always had the regional matchup there, and maybe one other one as well, but you had two that were locked in. I think the Big Ten should do that. And then they can either rotate 7 and stay at 9 conference games, or they could add in, one of the quote alliance games, ACC, Pac-12 or Big 12, whatever it is. Throw another one of those schools in there, add another big non-conference game. So I think people would be on board with that. But I think this is what you're going to start to see happening across college football. But I'm curious to see how many they lock in. Do you lock in 3 games? Do you lock in 2? Maybe you just have one rival that's locked in and you rotate around the rest of them. I know this, they have to find a better solution so that, Rutgers, Indiana, Maryland just aren't getting abused in the Big Ten East, because it's the power dynamic has been lopsided toward the East for the last decade. I mean, the West has never won a championship. Wisconsin won it in the first year, but that was in the legends and leaders stuff when it was split before. And so the Big Ten West has never won. I think that's largely due to Ohio State. Obviously Michigan last year, Michigan State being really good, Penn State. And so they've got to find a way to figure this out. And getting the 2 best teams in and eliminating divisions is ultimately going to put the best product out there. And hopefully as the college football playoff expands, that'll be the best thing ultimately for the Big Ten. Now, on to a guy who I absolutely love. One of my favorite coaches in all of college football. Heck, in football in general, because the dude coached in the NFL. The coach at Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin. They were told by Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, after the beef between Saban and Jimbo, gag order in place. Not allowed to talk to the press. Well, Lane apparently didn't care. He went and sat down with Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated. Ross does a great job covering college football for SI. Had him on my local show a bunch. And Lane had some unbelievable quotes. And a lot of this stuff is true. You may not like it, but it's true. Said, we're going to throw some of this stuff up. Number one, he said, we're a professional sport. These guys are professional players. I don't think you can argue that with where college football is now. The money is so big It's basically a professional sport right now. And he gets into the recruiting aspect. So we throw up another one. So you take a 17-year-old, a lot of them don't come from money and their family doesn't come from money. And if any person tells you their NIL is not their number one thing, take 100 of them and ask them about the number one thing, and that's going to make their decision. It's not the size of the stadium. It's not the head coach, not the campus or the conference. The number one thing will be money. Now, I ultimately don't think that the number one thing is always money. I think sometimes you look at short money, you look at long money. Long money is going to the best school that will develop you for the NFL. Now, you can make a lot of cash, obviously, on NIL, but offensive linemen aren't. A lot of defensive guys aren't. You're going to make money when you're drafted in the first round, when you're a top 5 pick. That's where you make that cash. And so if you can go to a school that can develop you, I think that might be more important to those guys. For quarterbacks, for receivers, running backs, big-time skill positions, wouldn't surprise me at all. Now, he wants to get into the other thing with boosters and how the collectives and boosters are impacting all of this. Throw this up. If there's something big money people are motivated to do, they do. Everyone wants to own an NFL team. It's essentially like you're a minority owner if you're a big-time investor, quote, in a collective. You get to show up on Saturday and see your product. He goes on to say this as we throw this up. I've been there where the owner calls and said, we need to play this guy. And I say, no, we need to play this other guy. I'll tell you what's going to happen. You get fired. You get fired on an overhead projector. What's going to happen when the lead donor calls and says to play with this guy and you don't? Do you not get fired? And he's referencing there Al Davis firing him from the Raiders when he wanted to play Jamarcus Russell, and Lane knew he wasn't ready. And so there could be elements of this now within college football. This is something that you could very easily see happening. The fact that when you have massive collectives and people are writing huge 7-figure checks into it, it happens a little bit now. But when you're writing money that's going directly to players, you want to see the guys who you are taking care of ultimately be out there on the field. That's just the reality. It's just the reality. And so as we sit here and look at this and say, like, is it more like college? It's more like the NFL, like starting to kind of get ownership components and people are starting to throw a lot of cash around. Sometimes it can be a hard argument to distinguish between the two. And so Lane threw all that out there. He didn't go after any coaches. He didn't put anybody's name on it. But I think what he said was very true. The kids call spitting facts. And he threw a lot of facts out there. It didn't always feel good. Maybe it didn't always feel right, but it was accurate, what he was saying. And so we've got to figure this darn thing out. And I love the fact that Lane puffed up his chest and went out with Ross, had to sit down and put this stuff. It wasn't a video, it wasn't audio, but it was to text, and it was a straight Q&A, and it was out there in Sports Illustrated and put it in SI. And so thank you to Ross Dellinger for getting that for us. Thank you to Lane Kiffin for delivering us those gems, saying that college football, telling people what it really is, the second most popular professional sport in America. And the fact that if you ask 17-year-olds who don't have a lot, how important is NIL going to be in their decision for their situation? Well, it's going to be really important. And I don't blame those guys. It's tough. A lot of people making these decisions, and this is one of my main beefs with the NCAA and all the decisions that they've made and the choices and the presidents and the ADs. Those people have been getting fed so well for so long, they forgot what it was like to be hungry. I don't know where they all came from, maybe humble beginnings, but when you've been making a lot of money for a long time and you're not around those players, the school presidents, they've never been around those players like that. ADs, maybe a little bit, but the coaches are around there all the time. And they see the players, they go visit them in their homes. They know where they're from. And so I get it. I understand it. I try to stay connected to guys, young guys, because of this. So you can understand their thought processes with it. Because like I said, it's easy for you to look at things differently when your situation is dramatically different. And so that's one thing that they've got to get figured out and get corrected. And I know that they will. Well, thank you for listening to this edition of Carps Corner. Continue to tune in, continue to subscribe, continue to watch, like it, comment on it, share it. If you have any topics, anything you want me to address, please let me know and we'll dive right in.